during this period of time NASA is going to get their come and meet us all about this issue incident or whatever.
Right.
We're also going to see a situation where it depends on how we interpret it. If we're really bold, we'll say that the Bushista entity is indicating that that small fraction of the population that worships Bush and his gang of cronies are in for a real hard time, because they're going to go from a period of rampaging confusion to disintegration and dissolution.
Okay.
And it's going to occur under this, again, under the militancy, so we can say, well, Iraq isn't going to go well. We also can say that the economic aspects appear to go very badly beginning in December. They appear to go badly for some considerable time.
Yeah.
6 months or more. Now, we're not saying that this is like a Dow chart or a price indicator chart or something along those lines. This is an emotional tension thing. We build up emotional tension in the populace over the fall, and then we have a release in early December, and then a brief response snap-back rise of a couple of days or a week, and then a gradual step-by-step down at a fairly steep angle. I'd have to say maybe 30 degrees down or something.
Yeah.
So the downward thing will be quite noticeable. We could probably put it as to an analog of, say, the bond crash in 1932, I believe it was, which was really the start of the Depression.
You think this is going to be the same forerunner coming in for, let's say, another depression?
We're getting certainly those words popping all over the place.
Yeah.
Depression of such a magnitude that it might be called the Greater Depression or whatever, and it'll last at least a decade. That's the emotional quotient. That's the fear that's out there. And we have to also bear in mind that our work is a little one-sided, because fear emotions and negative emotions have a higher emotive value and are more consistent across language. We have a tendency to pick those up in preference to more benign words.
Boy. In the runs, and I know you're finishing one up this weekend, aren't you?
Correct, part 6, which will do all the small entities and such, yeah.
Yeah. The main area that you have been checking for, if I understand it, has been economic, hasn't it, this time, primarily?
Yes. Unfortunately, we always find that serendipitously, that is never the largest entity. But that was indeed our goal.
Yeah.
Our primary backers are economically focused and pay very large amounts of money for our bandwidth. And so we owe them the courtesy and the service of scoping that out as much as possible.
Right.
Saved some of them on dollar deals here recently.
What's that?
Oh, there were a couple of foreign providers for bandwidth here had been informed by some people that, now is the time to go heavily against the dollar. And the stuff I was seeing was saying, well, not right at the moment. And we fiddled around and came up with a little scale and picked a number by which they could live. And they dumped a bunch of shorts and a bunch of, which I don't understand the absolute mechanism of. This is how they described it to me.
Right.
And then they also dumped their plans to do shorting at the moment, and things had turned around precipitously that very same day, like within hours of that conversation.
Interesting. We just got another thing on the dreadlocks, and Larry Clark is saying that people claim visual evidence of clouds coming down from the towers were the result of micro nukes, and I've heard that before too, because that's your dreadlocks. You've seen those kind of smoke trails.
I've seen those effects, and I have to say that the preponderance of rational examination of the situation of the towers would lend one to give credence to the idea that it was not destroyed by airplanes.
You betcha.
Doesn't prove it. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but nonetheless, it's an open mind would say, hey, wait a second. Some of this stuff doesn't make any sense.
Have you in the web bots that you have done since 9/11, have you come up with a lot of information about possibly who did cause it?
No, but we're not looking for such things, because bear in mind that is a backward-looking kind of a deal.
Yeah, right.
So there's certain questions we don't look to answer, like what happened or why something happened. What happened does always lead you into past tense stuff, and the why always leads you into intent, and that's just a huge mass of gobbledygook that gets you nowhere. To a certain extent, you see, our goal was very pragmatic. We wanted to be able to have enough information to give us a heads up on a general trend. Very much like Gallup or any of these other pollsters who want to say, oh, things are turning bad. The floor is dropping in support for our criminally seated government. Geez, I wonder what we're going to do. That kind of thing. Only we wanted to know this a few months before they got around to thinking about it.
Yeah, right. Okay. Can you share with us any of the other, let's say, strange findings or anomalous information that's come out, Clif?
There's a great deal of it, so you'd have to be more specific if you've got an area that you want to discuss.
Well, obviously, it's always interesting economically. If the world is going to drop the dollar and go straight to the euro or whatever.
It doesn't quite look to happen that way. We have to stop and say that one of the natures or the very nature of what we do, let's go back to the science of yoga. They say you'll never master anything without a correct knowledge of its essential nature.
Okay.
And that's a good statement for anything in life.
Okay.
And that does not mean reductionism necessarily. I have people that are occasionally trying to get me to do things where they want me to do what's known as system of systems thinking. And it's the ability to visualize a complex system in your head and move it around bits and pieces and look and see where potential flaws or faults may lay, this kind of thing. Very much like what I did for Microsoft with the SMS. Very complex system. I didn't write the code. I came on in and examined it afterwards and had some thoughts about how it could be improved. So the system of systems thinking allows one to approach things like the data gathering and come up with a lot of information. It also, to a certain extent, precludes one from focusing too much on certain details. But we do get weird hints of stuff because, of course, people talk about stuff all the time. Like, for instance, just as in a current immediacy value, the suggestion currently is running around that if one wanted to avoid an alien abduction situation, one should have a large dog that lives with them and sleeps with them in the bedroom. Okay, but why this should arise and be mainly concentrated in areas of Latin America is anybody's guess.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, but it's future looking, you know, avoid, etc., and it relates to fear and so on.
Right. Oh, jeez.
So there's a great deal of oddity that arises that we just don't know how to characterize. Then there's some, fairly scary stuff in the sense that at the metadata level, it shows that over the next few years are going to be extremely trying, and that part of this will be changes to the fundament and the firmament upon which we exist.
Explain that a little if you can.
Well, in 1997, when we were doing some focused runs, I was hunting for information about Stanford University Network, a company that does computers, and they're otherwise known as Sun. And I kept getting all these annoying references to the sun itself, the big ball of scary light in the sky.
Yeah.
And it got to be to the point where I said, okay, let's stop and change our assumptions and not assume that this is trash data, assume that it's meaningful. And so what's it telling us? Well, we've had such an occurrence recently. Prior to 1997, I didn't see a whole lot on the sun. I had a statistical variant of maybe 1 to 2% in any given period. Now, bear in mind, I wasn't doing constant data runs. It was taking forever to do. The bandwidth was slow. The internet was nowhere near as fast. So the data volumes were smaller, and we were doing maybe 2 a year.
Wow.
Okay, now we can do them about every 6 weeks. But we have many more prologue programs that's grown, etc. In any event, now the big discussion is about GRBs and external forms of energy. And it's not just simply GRBs. There's vast quantities of discussions about all kinds of energy. Low energy electrons, high energy electrons, recurrent, non-recurrent photons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is in the general public. Now, going back to the education versus schooling issue, apparently a whole lot of people have refused to allow the government with their schooling to control their education, and they're out educating themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the level of discussion about scientific matters, especially on the fringe, almost entirely on the fringe, is way up. And it's very articulate, erudite, and exacting, because these people don't want to be called nut jobs and flakes, so they get their math right.
Yeah.
Now, why should we have GRB discussions over the past couple of years rise up? We've been getting energetic sun, energy from the sun, so on and so on, since perhaps 2001.
How do you
basically, the big question for me at a very large, beyond the metadata level, at a metaphysical level, is what are we being told?
Or why, too?
Well, I'll pass on the why for the moment.
Okay.
And just deal with the what. Are we being told that huge amounts of energy are pouring into the sun and our world's going to end in 2012? Are we being told that there's vast quantities of energy pouring in from all over space affecting all the planets?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, the United States, no. We're not being told any of this by NASA. No one says a peep about any of this.
Right, yeah.
And now GRBs are radiation in and of themselves. It may not have escaped your notice, but there's a whole lot of people wandering around out there that were born since 1975 that don't know the sun used to be yellow. And now it's white.
Yeah, that's true. Now, Cliff, go into that a little bit, because that's a pretty good one. Why has it changed? How come nothing has ever been mentioned?
No, you can't say that. Okay, there's the how come is a why. Why hasn't it been mentioned? And we should clarify that. Why hasn't it been mentioned in press that is frequented by the United States, the mainstream media, the corporate media that we call it?
Yeah.
That's a real good question. That's a why question. That goes to their intent.
Okay.
I don't really want to speculate on that because it just leads me down to emotional paths that are not really particularly fruitful at the moment. When you're standing right in front of the bastardito that did it all, well then, okay, you can ask them why, because you've got the ability to have an instant response if you don't like their answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but you have to be careful about some of these things because they do actually go to mind control issues. There's no point running around and allowing your monkey mind, that part of the mind that runs off on its own and is constantly chattering at you, to have any more fuel than it actually needs. In fact, one of the disciplines, the very first discipline, is to get control of that critter.
That's your fear subconscious mind aspect of it.
That is the emotional. There's this concept called attachment or desire and revulsion, known in Sanskrit as like the klesas. My accent is terrible. Klesas. Anyway, this concept is that both of those bind the body, bind you to a grosser form of expression than you really are, and trap you in a emotional response to the things that are going on. Now, bear in mind, emotions are hormonal. I mean, they're basically driven by biochemicals. Those biochemicals affect the state of your brain. The state of your brain imposes itself on your mind. If you allow it, the mind will overtake your will and impose that state on the will, and you suffer. Mm-hmm. If you can separate the will from the mind, then when those emotions arise, you can say, not now, or go away.
Yeah.
And they do. Thereafter, you don't suffer that emotion at that particular time.
Are these internal emotions created internally, or do you think, Cliff, that these have been sent to us, programmed into us through an outside source?
If you mean like someone sitting out with a machine beaming it at me, no, I don't buy that.
Okay.
Okay, it may well be that there are people, I know that people out there make a very good living manipulating